Welcome and welcome to this week's edition of the People Progressing podcast. Today I have Kyle Nelson on, and this is going to be amazing. I can't wait to get into this and take a deep dive. And Kyle's going to really help a lot of us progress today and learn and grow from this podcast. And just can't wait to get going with this. Kyle, I can't thank you enough for coming on. And I want to first start this out by just having you tell our listeners like where you grew up, what you kind of like to do as a kid, some of the things that you did that helped you grow and progress as a kid.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, thanks, Joe, for having me on. I appreciate the invite, and hopefully we all take away a little something from my life experience today, and we'll see where it goes. But to answer your question, I grew up in just I guess a quasi small town, a suburb of the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Was your average all-American boy who, I guess, well, times have changed. We're both a little bit on the midlife side of things. But yeah, I was growing up, I was into baseball, basketball, football, all that kind of stuff. I played as many sports as I could. Wasn't the greatest student growing up, but because I was more interested in sports than I was school at the time. But yeah, I was just an average kid that just enjoyed life and I really appreciated hanging out with friends and doing that kind of stuff. And then throughout life, I've had some interesting experiences that I think we're going to touch on today.
Yeah, it's amazing what you've been through and what you've overcome. And you went to college at University of Minnesota, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So I got my undergrad from the University of Minnesota through the College of Biological Sciences. At the time, I thought I was going to go and get my PhD in research science or something, maybe med school, something along those lines. And then that didn't. I ended up working in a DNA lab, a genetics lab on campus for a couple of years, and just really figured out that wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. And went into the business world, started in banking from there, and ended up getting my MBA from the Carlson School of Management, again at the University of Minnesota, and have now been working in healthcare for, over 2 decades now. So yeah, I have lived in a couple different states. I've been in Arizona, I've been in Colorado, I live in Texas now. But I've been the CEO of a very large, nationally recognized orthopedic practice for 6-7 years. I currently now own a couple parts of minority stakes in a couple different companies, and I do own 2 companies outright at 100%. And I guess blossoming in the latter part of my career into a serial entrepreneur and just love freewheeling and grinding and doing that kind of stuff. And it's really relaxing, although the hours are long, but it's kind of fun. I'm still passionate about it.
Well, it's amazing. And what I want our listeners to do is remember all of those things that you've accomplished. And we're going to go through some of the things that you had to overcome to accomplish those. And that's kind of what we're talking about with progressing here. And this is where I'm really getting excited. And the first real life traumatic experience that you had happened as a kid when you were walking home from school. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah. So I was at the time 12 years old. It was May. I was walking home from school, and it's about 3/4 to a full mile away from the school. I was the furthest house from the boundary to getting bused versus walking to school. So I was the furthest kid away that had to walk. And I typically had a friend of mine, his name was Brian. We would walk the same route, and there was about 2.5 blocks where he would then go to his house and I had to go on by myself. And in that 2.5 block time frame or distance, there was a car that pulled over and tried to pull me in to the vehicle. So it was an attempted abduction. I did end up getting out of him grabbing me and ran back to my friend Brian's house. And so, yeah, it was an incredibly traumatic event. It is something that I will say, and I'm assuming we're going to touch on it later on, I'm still addressing as an adult. Think about it, 36 years, I'm 48 years old, and that happened at 12, and I'm still dealing with it now at the age of 48. And I would like to confess that I'm appropriately dealing with it. For the last 2 years, I kind of ignored it and let it fester for over 3 decades.
Yeah, and I've had people on my podcast. I had a gentleman named Preston Adams who we really talked about childhood trauma and the effects that has on people, to help people understand what the effects of childhood trauma is. Can you kind of go into, you mentioned that you've been dealing with it for 30 something years. What are some of the things that you have been dealing with over that time?
It affected me on many different ways. In looking back on it, I can see how it affected me even broader than I originally thought. I'm a father of 3. I've got a grandson now who was just born in May of this year, so
That's awesome.
Super excited about that. But it affected the way that I dealt with my kids in public. I would have high anxiety going out to a restaurant, a park, going to the zoo. In moments where you're supposed to be fostering positive, exciting moments for your kids, inside I had these deep, like, stomach turning moments where I would not be paying attention to my kids. I'd be scanning the crowd going, is there somebody here? And looking back on it, and at the time I felt embarrassed about it, just because I know that's not normal for most people, or in my mind, it's not normal. I can't speak for everybody else, but looking back on it, it really affected the way that I parented. It really affected the way that I interacted with people in public. I would find myself being withdrawn. Once you get to know me, I won't shut up, but initially I'm kind of a wallflower just because I have that veil put up. Early on, after the abduction, again, you kind of know that these things are odd or abnormal, but I would be in my own house living with my parents, and for the months afterwards, if there was a window that would face the street and I had to walk in front of it, I would get on my hands and knees and crawl underneath it to avoid being seen. Now, you're supposed to be in this safe space at your parents' house. They're there to protect you, raise you, do all that kind of stuff. I was fearful to be seen by someone that was driving by. I would hide, and it ended up coming back out due to another event later in life. But what I will say about that, and I've written, journaled about this for myself. It started the creation in my own mind of, as I affectionately call, this box that I would start pushing stuff in. And I would push it into that box, and I would close the lid and bind it up, hermetically seal it to the extent that I could, so that it wouldn't come out. Now, after a later event that happened, I know that there were leaks in that box. And as evidenced by being out in public with my kids, just being out in public in general, it doesn't go away unless you forwardly deal with that kind of stuff.
And you didn't really know at that time, though. And I think this is what I want people to understand about this is most of us wouldn't know that that event would have that effect on us for so long, or continuously for so long, because we don't really understand what trauma really does to us, do we?
No, not at all. And the reason why, and I'll give you my 2 big reasons for why you don't know how that affects you that greatly, is because it becomes your new normal. That is your normal, where, right. Joe, you may have a different interaction in a different way at going to the zoo with your kids. Mine was entirely different, but that was normal for me, mm-hmm. which is different than your normal. Secondarily, our minds are brilliant. They are some of the best supercomputers you can possibly have. But I would submit to you that they're also some of the biggest liars
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
your normal that you think it is. And my brain kept everything in that box, although it did leak, but it kept also telling me a story that, one, my abnormal behavior of crawling under things, hiding in places, was okay and normal,
Yeah.
because my brain is trying to get me to survive.
Yeah.
And whether it be an attempted abduction, whether it be getting through public speaking, if you're fearful of public speaking, and I actually enjoy it. But let's say you do have that fear, your brain is going to tell you a story to do one of two things: to, one, get through it, or two, to try to find a way to get out of it and come up with an excuse. So your brain is always trying to protect you, whether it be breathing, circulation, kidney function, whatever, but it's also telling you a story that is probably not always true, just to get you to move forward and continue to live and survive.
And so my question to you is this then, Kyle, how did you move forward? Because you accomplished so much in your lifetime with sports, going to University of Minnesota, getting an MBA, getting into owning your own businesses, being a CEO. How did you overcome it when it was still there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I used to say this outwardly as kind of a joke, but I was actually telling my own truth to people. Fear is a great motivator.
Right.
I would have these huge doubts about myself. I was CEO. We were doing tens of $50 million plus a year revenue. And all of a sudden I would go home and go, "You're a fraud. You have no idea what you're doing." And I was growing these businesses by millions of dollars more a year. And outwardly, I could walk into the community and people would be like, "Oh, that's Kyle. He runs that organization. He's the CEO, and look what he's doing." And I thought I was a complete fraud. And it was that whole fight or flight fear mentality that kept driving me, that I would wake up every morning with this huge stress load on me that I didn't really show people. But internally, I was like, I have to outproduce, out hustle, outwork, put in more hours than anyone else to get things done, just to prove. At the
I'm worth
time, I thought it
something.
was to everybody else, but it was actually proving it to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people in that same situation, and sometimes not even because of a trauma situation, right?
Without a doubt.
So the stress, you talk about the stress and anxiety that was causing you. Did that cause any medical concerns or anything like that you were going through at that time too?
Yeah, I would have bouts of depression that would pop up periodically. I've been on antidepressants before at certain segments of time, and looking back on it, I can now say confidently that there was these moments that were very stressful, and all of a sudden, that fear overtook me, and I needed something. There were other things like, I had for about a year long thing with my stomach where it was acid reflux. Was on medication. I don't do much of that anymore. I'm just in a pretty peaceful space as I'm working on myself. But yeah, there were times where you would just get run down, and all of a sudden you're sleeping for 24 hours straight because you just kept going, just because you had to, not to anybody else, but to yourself. And so I was the worst person in my universe of people that I know that would, and I don't like the term work-life balance, because work is part of your life. You just need to find a life balance. And I was the worst person at finding a life balance that was beneficial to me and the people around me.
Well, it kind of almost sounds like you felt like you had to prove yourself all the time.
Yep.
Like 24/7, 365. Kyle's got to prove himself, not only to himself, but to everyone else.
Yeah. The weirdest thing that I still fight to this day is, during those high functioning times of being a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, I could not put my head on a pillow every night unless every email, voicemail, and text message was responded to. Otherwise, I would have these like panic attacks. And it's not OCD. I can confidently tell you that. It was fear-based exclusively, that I would send emails at 2 a.m. to people just to get it off my plate. Otherwise, I thought I was failing.
Wow. Now, I want to go back a little bit. When you were at the University of Minnesota,
Mhm.
you served somebody in an unbelievable way. What did you do?
Yeah, so I was 29 at the time, and in between semesters at business school, so I had 4 weeks off in between semesters. I took a final on a Thursday. I was at a bachelor party that weekend, and then Tuesday the following week, I donated a kidney to my father. And I had 4 weeks to recover and get back to school. And I did it. It was something remarkable. I gave my dad an additional 18 years on this earth. He passed away just coming up on 3 years now. But yeah, it was an amazing experience. One that I don't regret doing. I would do it again for friends, family. I think it's something that everyone should consider, not only just post-mortem on their driver's license, but if you have a loved one, seriously consider getting tested. The recovery nowadays, and I was one of the early adopters of having it harvested directly through your abdomen, where before they'd pull it out of your side and you'd have like a 12-inch scar. Mine was done laparoscopically and
Wow.
with minimal scarring. And so
Wow.
my recovery, I was in the hospital for 5 days in and out, and obviously worn down. You had some painkiller stuff just to take the edge off, but I would do it again. I was back in school 4 weeks afterwards.
And I want to ask you this question because I think this is important for everyone to know. When you did that, when you were going through that and you decided to do it and you went through the whole process and your dad got your kidney and so forth, how was the stress and anxiety of your life during that time? Did you feel more peace at that time?
Yes and no. I think the stressful events that I've been through in my life, I look at as a blessing and a curse. The curse is the aftermath, what happens inside here, but also it has prepared me for high stress moments. And there's another one coming up. Spoiler alert, it's kind of a big one. But for me, I was already in that, hey, I kind of know what I'm going to do. And so when my dad started having the conversation with us in January about, hey, I'm going to need a kidney, I went to my brother and sister and I said, it's a wrap. I got this. And I didn't, it was kind of a bragging moment, but internally I was like, you know what, I'm doing it. And I originally told everyone the reason why, and I still believe it, is I love my dad. I got to know how great of a person he was. I wanted my kids to continue to have that opportunity to see what kind of man I knew him as. And with that in mind, there are risks to every surgery, every time you go to the hospital, all of that. And at the time, my youngest, my son, was under a year old. And so as you're leading up to that, and I was a perfect match for my dad. I mean, it was like 10 out of 10 perfect match. But going through that, you're giving blood and they're doing all these tests on you to make sure, because my dad had a genetic disorder that killed off both of his kidneys. They had to make sure I didn't have it. And then you have to go talk to a social worker that says, okay, do you have a will? Do you have life insurance? Do you go through all of this stuff, which makes it all too real that you're not just, this isn't a walk in the park. It's not like getting a tooth taken out. You're actually having an organ of your body taken out. So while I say it's a great thing to do and I highly recommend it, there are other components of that you have to seriously consider. And yeah, I took that risk and everything worked out, and it was great. But there were some real moments there where you had to stop and go, I'm redoing my will because this could all be over in a month.
Yeah.
And so you ebb and flow, but I had this cocky attitude about it, like, no big deal. I got this. I've been through stressful moments. This is nothing. And so the grateful part of going through stressful moments in your life is you kind of either get desensitized or prepared for the next one.
Yeah. You learn, you grow.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to.
Yes.
That's the great thing I tell people is that's your choice.
Yeah.
You can choose if you want to learn and grow, or you can choose to be bitter and not get better from it. And that's the key thing that you said there. That's what you did, but you also made the ultimate service to others in that situation.
Yeah.
And you're a servant, and we'll get into that here in a minute. Now, as we get going into your story even more, you had another traumatic experience that kind of brought all of this to light, and it's kind of helping you now understand what really happened when you were 12 and helping you kind of get through that now. Am I saying that right?
That's 100% accurate. Yeah. So I mentioned previously about having all of this stressful events, all of this pain, all this anxiety that I kept shoving into the box. And I was at a point in my life where I was really what I thought. And I would say my brain again was lying to me, saying, you're good, you're happy, you're fine, you don't have anything to deal with, life is good. Well, I was driving across country, and I was driving to Phoenix, Arizona, and I had spent the night in Dallas, Fort Worth, and I was going to make that long drive that day. And it was a Wednesday in January 21st, 2020. And I will openly confess, I had one too many drinks the night before. I wasn't driving that night. I walked back to the hotel, stayed in the hotel, got up, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go slow because I had one too many. I'm just going to take it easy. But I did skip breakfast, and I normally, when I'm driving, I'll fill up first thing in the morning as soon as I hit the road, and I didn't. And so there was this like chain of events that I just broke out of my normal way of doing things. And I normally will openly confess, I normally speed when I drive, usually like 10 miles over the speed limit. I have been pulled over my fair share of times. I didn't that day. It was raining. So, and I had been on the road, that stretch of road before. So I was like, okay, I'll go speed limit, maybe 1 or 2 above, and I'll be fine. Well, as I'm driving, the gas light that says, hey, you need to fill up with gas comes on. And I'm like, well, there's not a whole lot around here. And I'm in West Texas. And if anyone wants to know where it is, it's a small town called Kent. And I decided to take the next exit that had a gas station. Now, the town of Kent, Texas has about 50 people in it. And if you take that exit, there is a Chevron station there, and there is not much else. I could not tell you by standing in that intersection at that exit where any of those 50 people live. They're probably on ranches. I have no clue. All there is this gas station. And as I pulled up, I saw the employee running out the door of the gas station, followed by 2 individuals who tackled him onto the ground and started to attempt to stab him. One was attempting to stab him in the chest. The other was trying to cut his neck. I won't go into too much detail beyond that. I will say that person is alive today. So
because of you,
I played a part in him being around. Yes. And I am, well, we'll talk about why I'm working on that now, but I will say that I think I saved 4 people that day. The employee is alive today, and he is working on his recovery physically and mentally, emotionally. Those 2 boys, they were 18 at the time. They were there to rob the place for drug money. They are alive today. They are not in jail. They did not serve jail time. They got 4 years probation.
Wow.
I do have some moments of conflict about that, just because their intent there and things that I heard, they intended to kill that person that day. So I struggle a little bit with that from a moral and ethical standpoint, but I I'm okay that they were 18-year-old kids, and at the time they were the exact same age as my son. My son was 18 at the time as well, and I look at them as kind of, my God, that could have been my son. You know, where did they go wrong? Where did he go right? What transpired through all of that? But they're on this. They're out in society. I don't know what they're doing now. I hope that they're doing well. I hope they look at that as a second chance at life, and I hope they use it wisely. The last person, and for me the most important one, is I think I saved myself that day through that trauma, and it was bad. It was ugly. I will say that I had to have my truck detailed multiple times because I kept finding blood inside of it.
Oh, wow.
Uh, you know, there were times where I'd just be driving down the road and I'd look over and go, "Oh, there's another patch of blood," and have to have that cleaned out. So it was a constant reminder as you would look over at that kind of stuff. But as I mentioned before, that box that my brain convinced me that I had hermetically sealed it to the point where I didn't have to deal with any of it. That there was a monster that ended up walking into my head that day, and he took that box and he tore it apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything that I had ever been through in my entire life came flooding out. I kind of went off the grid shortly thereafter. I drove into a national park and just hid for a little bit, which kind of set the tone of what was going to happen going forward. And it kind of was synonymous with what I did after I was almost abducted. For months afterwards, I was hiding in closets for a couple hours or freezing when someone would come to the door. I did have enough, I guess, creative and constructive thought within my own mind to raise my hand and ask for help. I did go through a couple psychologists that, to no fault of theirs, they were ill-equipped for something along those lines. And I eventually found the right person. She's out of Phoenix, Arizona. She does exclusive work with PTSD people. I am the only civilian she sees. The rest of the folks are police and firefighters. So I feel blessed that I have that access to her, because she is a brilliant person in that space. But she even encouraged me to get out and go for walks. And I would go hike in the mountains in Arizona, and I would get scared by birds that would jump out of bushes. And it just started to spiral from there to some pretty dark moments. I will openly admit that I've had some bad thoughts about doing things to myself.
Yeah.
And even while I was in therapy with her, and we have worked through a lot of that, and through that gas station event, it has forced me in a very positive way to deal with all of the stuff that happened before, all of the self-doubt, all of the abduction, all of the times where I sat there and said, I'm living a complete fraud here. But I wasn't. I was producing what I needed to do for
Hmm.
employers and everybody else, but I didn't think I was doing anything right. And so I have effectively worked through all of that, and I am using. I have not used an antidepressant during or since that gas station event. I just, with one kidney, I want to be hypersensitive to that, just so I don't put stuff into my system that is potentially going to harm me. And that is no way a slight against the pharmaceutical industry, so please don't sue me. You never know. But I do some talk therapy. I do some group stuff where I have spoken about my events in life, much like I do on this podcast. I have done some talks to absolute strangers. On the 1 year anniversary, I talked about what happened to me, and it was very good for me to speak about my past. And so I truly appreciate the opportunity here, Joe. I do EMDR therapy. For those of you that don't know about it, it's kind of a weird science, and I highly recommend reading about it, because if you've gone through some trauma, it could potentially help you. And I've also done some alternative therapies that are outside of normal medicine. I have done psilocybin. For those of you that don't know what it is, it's called magic mushrooms if you buy it on the street. But it is now being proven in research studies to be therapeutically positive in a wide range of topics.
And so go back just a little bit. We need to touch on this because I know this is a big problem in the United States right now. The PTSD,
yeah,
is a major problem, not just with our military. I had an ex-player of mine who was an ex-SWAT team member who talked about PTSD. I know some people that, even younger. I know a 14-year-old person that has some PTSD. Yeah. So when you kind of pinpointed that as what is happening, and what I want people to understand is PTSD isn't just with people in the military. It does happen, and it is a major issue that we need to deal with the military and what had happened over in Afghanistan, Iraq, and so forth. But it also happens to people of trauma, your trauma. So when you had that PTSD, you mentioned first, I'll talk about this first. What was the EMRD? How successful was that in helping you with that? So people understand a little bit what that is.
Yeah, so and there's multiple different ways to use tools to go through the EMDR therapy. But in a nutshell, what it does is it forces you, and it's an odd thing when you first start to do it. You get confused because as you're using these tools, for mine, I was holding these two probes, and they were alternating, vibrating, and lights. And it goes for a period of time, about 45 seconds to a minute, and then it shuts off, and it's controlled by your therapist. And immediately there's an idea or a thought that flushes into your brain, and you then talk it out for a period of time. Some of it's highly emotional. I would break down and cry, and it's okay to do that. It's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
And physically and mentally and emotionally, after an hour of doing that, you are absolutely exhausted. And fortunately for me, mine was at the end of the day. It was like from 4 to 5 p.m. and I still do it to this day, but it's becoming less and less because you become, I don't want to say desensitized to it, but you realize that it's a couple things. You realize that it's in the past. It's not something that should affect you right now, but because you are reliving it, you realize that over and over and over. And so you're creating a new mental mindset or a pathway for your neurons to say, you're okay. I don't need to tell you the story that everything's fine. It's part of your story. It is,
right.
My traumas, my successes, it's all part of my story.
Right.
And we as people have to learn that, and I enjoy talking to people that say, I just want to be happy all the time. I just want to be happy. And my response to that is, that's an impossible goal, and you will hate yourself, and you will get so frustrated. You're going to end up in therapy because of it. So address that right now, because we do have sad moments in our lives. We do have stressful moments in our lives. And we need to be able to sit in those feelings and understand how it affects us, why it affects us, and that we can move on from it. And I would never do that. I kept shoving things in that box.
Yeah. Wow. What a great way to put that. That's a great way for people to understand it. Really. I bet you, even with me, it really made sense what you just said. And the way you analogize it by putting things in the box, really powerful way to describe it. Now let's go into, because you had mentioned to me before, I don't know what the term is, but I'll just use the loose term, the magical mushroom. that's more getting into more of a controlled way of giving that to people now, correct?
Yeah, it is a controlled environment. There is a lot of exciting science, and I kind of geek out on that stuff. It goes back to my undergraduate degrees in science. There are some great therapies out there that are pharmaceutical in nature. There is the talk therapy. There's EMDR. I mean, gosh, you talk about some of the stuff like hypnotism, you talk about acupuncture. We're finding now that some of the studies that were going on in the 60s and 70s that have now been outlawed because of illegal use of these substances is now being researched and studied for the last decade plus, and being able to be shown that there is huge therapeutic advantages to it. Some of the stuff for PTSD, they use ketamine, LSD, they use psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, and all of them are showing very promising outcomes. And I will say this right now: do not do it on your own. They are still illegal to do it, but if you want to, you can find a way to get there through research studies. Some of the stuff is starting to become legal. I know, Joe, you're in Colorado. I even talked to somebody in Colorado about doing a ketamine deal that is covered potentially by your insurance, your health insurance. Mm-hmm. So some of that is starting to hit mainstream. A lot of it is in late stage studies with the federal government. And so all of this is going to really break some big time groundwork in the space of mental health, which again, having gone through what I've been through and working in healthcare for over 2 decades, it's long overdue, because it's kind of the third rail of healthcare. If somebody tears their ACL, we kind of know what to do. Surgery, you repair it. You have a migraine, we can do that. You've got a strep throat. Well, we've got antibiotics for that. We still haven't scratched the surface how amazing this thing is between your ears. And we're now trying to go forward and figure what we can do. And you even see it to this day, this year especially, you see some high functioning world-class athletes raising their hand and saying, I've got a problem.
Yeah,
I got a problem. And, you look at, and I'm blanking at her name, the female tennis player who walked away from a major tournament. I'm a big golf guy. It's my one life vice. Bubba Watson raised his hand. Matt Wolf, another PGA pro, raised his hand. He's like, I have moments where I just can't do it. I can't perform at that level. And historically, because you can't quantitate what that is, you just went through it. And I am guilty of it myself. Through my story, you just woke up and you're like, well, I'm going to do it just because I have to, because I'm fearful that I'm going to be shown to be this fragile person. And I should have raised my hand a long time ago. Unfortunately for me, or fortunate, depending on your outlook on the situation, I ended up in a gas station that now has forced me to deal with all of it.
So the analogy would be, when you were 12 years old, you tore your ACL in your knee and never got it fixed.
True. Yeah, that's 100% correct.
Really?
Yeah, that's perfect.
And what we want people to understand in this too is, we're not telling you to go out and get magic mushrooms and just go try it and you're going to be fixed. We want you to do all this is under a controlled environment.
Yep.
With people who know what they're doing, under the research and so forth. And it's just another opportunity that we're finding out for the mental health problems that can occur out there because of trauma and some other things that might happen in your life.
Yeah. And I will say, if I can, to that point, the only person that is going to be there for you all the time is you.
Yeah.
And it took me, and I had trial and error. I had people that were on board, and I have affectionately called it Team Kyle, that are now closer to me than I ever thought they were. And I've had people go, you know what, I'm out. I can't deal with it.
Right.
And maybe they're dealing with their own thing to no fault of their own. Maybe they had things to do with, and maybe it was like getting a little too close to the sun or hitting too close to home, and they just needed to step out, and that's okay too. So at the end of the day, you're left with yourself. And, if you think that you have a healthcare issue, 99 times out of 100, it's going to be up to you to address it first. And so I reached out to well over a dozen research studies before I did psilocybin. I was excluded from some I didn't get a response to, some I submitted my health records and they were like, no, you're a little bit outside of the parameters. And, maybe it was, I had one kidney, who knows?
Yeah.
You never know. But at the end of the day, I read up and probably knew more than anyone walking into that room to do it that day than anyone else, because I wanted to be better. I finally raised my hand for myself and said, by God, I'm going to do this. And so I took the steering wheel and just drove the damn car to the destination I wanted to get to.
And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, Kyle, is they don't, it's almost like a mental illness in our society is such taboo. It's something we don't want to talk about. It's a sign that I'm weak. It's all those different things that people attach to it. In reality, it is just like you tore your ACL. It's just another health issue that needs to be dealt with. And I think there's so many people out there who don't see it that way. They see it as a weakness or a sign that they're not strong enough to get through something or something like that. And that's kind of the sad part for me. And hopefully this will bring that out a little bit. Let's go to where you're at now.
Sure.
And you have started a program called the Contrarian Life. Can you explain that a little bit and give our listeners a little bit into that to try to maybe guide them into thinking a different way?
Yeah. So, it serves two purposes. So I started this very recently. I kind of feel empowered at this point with where I'm at. I know that I am a flawed person, and I'm not for everybody. But looking back on things that I have gone through in life, there has been contrarian moments, and a significant number of them that have led to me having the success that I've had, having me overcome things that I have gone through. And with everything on the negative side, if you look back on my life and some of the significant stressful, trauma-filled moments, I kind of feel like I've got a pretty cool story to tell. And I have started to engage with a couple different people on a national level to go speak to groups and some individuals as well. I do some individual conversations with people to talk about how you can empower yourself to take, like I had said, take control of that car, which is your life, and drive it to the destination you want. And I can say confidently now, looking back on my life, when I was in my late 20s, I was like, I woke up one morning and I said, you know what, I'm going to research about going to business school. And by God, I was going to do it. And I was going to go and do something better and better and better. When I did the kidney donation, I buckled down, and at night I researched as much as humanly possible about bad outcomes, good outcomes, how to prepare for it, do all of that stuff. And I have found that, it's okay to do things that are different than everybody else. And I use this when I talk to people. There are studies that have been done on the financial markets that the contrarian investor typically makes more money than the people that follow the crowd, because there is greater upside opportunity. The downside's about the same. You can lose your money, but there is greater upside if you go against the system. And you look at, and I'll use an example, another financial example, look at the early adopters of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to put $1 into Bitcoin when it was under $1 and you held it, where would you be today?
Mm-hmm.
You'd have a couple $100,000 just on that $1 alone. Now, I'm not that is not a paid endorsement of Bitcoin. I don't, unless they want to pay me, I will do a commercial for you. But I'm available. You can find me.
That's right.
But finding those contrarian avenues. Now, I could have stayed in my lane in sciences. I could have stayed in my lane in finance and banking. I could have stayed in my lane of being a healthcare executive. But I kept finding my interests being pulled elsewhere, and I have gone with that flow, and it has led me to business ownership that I own outright, smaller percentage businesses that I own, and it has also led me to a gas station in Texas. It's led me to raise my hand and finally ask for help. And it has allowed me to finally, at the age of 47, 48 years old, to find my voice that, much like you do, Joe, find a venue that I can potentially help people help themselves. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to build from a movement standpoint, is being a voice for people so that I can help them through my life experiences be better, both personally, professionally, and especially mentally and emotionally.
And how will that make you as a person by doing that?
So every time I talk to my psych, she asks the last question every time. She's like, how are you going to fill your cup? And is it going on a bike ride, going to play golf, hanging out with your grandson? Or is it, and it can be all of that. It can be any and all of it.
Yeah.
But this being able to help other people in situations that have gone through stress. And this isn't, my stress or my trauma is worse than your trauma. We all have a level of stress and anxiety in our lives. It's a matter of, can we learn from somebody else like me who has gone through some things to find ways to help ourselves? And that would fill my cup. It's fulfilling for me to help other people. And I find myself drawn to that in many facets of my life. I've volunteered for the March of Dimes. I've done, I've volunteered at soup kitchens on Christmas Day, and that filled my cup. I have now found a calling that I can kind of call my own, which is this Contrarian Life, and really try to help other people that may feel conflict in their life.
Yeah. And service is where it's at.
100%.
So I want people to understand is when you're struggling, serve. When you're feeling down, serve. When you're feeling helpless, help someone else. When you're feeling that, serve, because that's what gives you purpose. Yep. And which kind of leads me to my next three questions. My book is called The 3 Ps, Finding Your Purpose, Perspective, and Passion. What's your purpose in life? I think you just said it.
Well, I'll give you it changed over time. Before I was, I wanted to have this cool business title, and it's CEO. I can tell you that they hand that out and you can go start your own LLC and call yourself CEO, and it's worth nothing. It looks cool on a business card, but you're still just a normal guy, normal human, just like the rest of us. And I lost that early in life. I was like, I got to be this, there's a status, there's an income, there's all of that. And it's meaningless. It really is meaningless. It looks cool, but it's not worth much. You said my passion.
Yeah. Your purpose perspective. So what's your purpose, and then what's your perspective, and then what's your passion?
So my purpose now is, and one of the last conversations I had with my dad, he was going in for surgery and he never woke up. He was unconscious for 2 months and passed away. One of the last conversations we had, and it was the last conversation, he asked everyone to leave the room and he just wanted to talk to me. And he flat out asked me, he's like, I got your kidney inside me. Should I have this surgery? And it was like I had like an ownership stake in his well-being because I gave him a kidney, and I didn't view it at that. But I looked at him and I said, why wouldn't you? And he goes, no. He goes, I'm nervous. Should I do this? And I said, well, here's the deal, Dad. I'll make you this deal. Since I did give you a kidney, we can do one of two things. You can, and my brother had two young daughters at the time. And I said, you can gamble on that surgery and potentially buy yourself more time on this earth. And those girls can get to know you like my kids know you. Or right now, you hit the button, get the nurse in here, then get the doctor in here, and we'll sign you out against medical advice. And you and I will go to Las Vegas and we're never coming back. We're
Wow.
just, I'm going to live it up with you until you're done. And then I'm going to show up at your funeral. I'm going to tell one hell of a story. And he stopped and he laughed about it. And I knew he was going to do the surgery, but I think he was trying to get something else off his chest, and he did. He stopped and looked at me and he goes, what about you? And at the time I was CEO. I was full of myself and I was kind of cocky. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he looked at me and he goes, you know, there's no trailer hitch on the hearse, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, you can't take it with you. So what are you doing?
Wow. That is
And
awesome.
it got me.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
I had no response.
Yeah.
And what he was telling me is the exact same thing that you asked me, is what is my purpose? And I didn't understand it until after the gas station and starting this Contrarian Life. Is I'm finding my purpose, and it's okay to find it at 48 years old.
Yeah.
Some people will go a lifetime and not find it.
Yeah.
And so I feel like now I've got a voice, a platform, a narrative that I can tell people and help educate people, that I could walk into a room of people that have been hurt by trauma before and say, it's not going to dictate your life, but you need to take control of it.
Oh,
And
that's
so
awesome.
that's where I feel like my purpose is right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's become a passion of mine. I just launched the website in the last few weeks. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. And I'm going to blog on there on the website. And I am doing a little grassroots book called This Contrarian Life. I do have an ongoing conversation with a book publisher about getting it published. So yeah, I truly think that, if you look at me 5 years from now, I'll probably have hired someone to run the businesses that I own, and I'll make that passion and purpose a full-time job.
Okay, so I have a thing that purpose equals passion, and passion equals purpose.
Yep.
But what holds it together is your perspective. Because if you lose your perspective, you're probably going to get outside your purpose and your passion. So what is your perspective that's holding those two things together? Does that make sense?
Yeah, without a doubt.
This is awesome.
And your equation on life is 100% accurate. My perspective, I have been humbled by that gas station. Some people could say, I feel empowered and I can do all of this stuff. And, I would highly recommend not going on top of a building and jumping off, because you're not Superman and you're not going to fly. I got lucky to stop one crime. I'm not going to go look for it again. I am not Batman. But so my perspective on all of this is it forced me to be more humble than I ever have in my entire life. And it gave me additional perspective that it's okay to not be okay. I will have moments, and I will openly confess, when I had some thoughts and was about to take action to harm myself. It was just under a year ago as you and I sit here and talk. And I have moments where I still have flashbacks to things that have happened in my life. There are key dates, like the 1 year anniversary of the gas station. When I spoke about it, that was a horrible, horrible day for me. And I know that will be a pretty emotional day for the rest of my life. But my perspective is now, where before I would say, you're an idiot, you're a terrible person because you have these feelings. I have the perspective now that I need to sit in those feelings. I need to feel that emotion and understand how it affects me, why it happens. And that gives me further, deeper emotional perspective that I'm going to be okay. Where before I would shove it down, shove it down, and shove it down and hate myself for one, feeling that way, and two, having to do it. And you would feel embarrassed. Now, if I'm having a bad day, I will find a way to do, and a lot of people will say, how do you be self, how do you fulfill yourself? Or mindfulness is the big word that's being used right now. And that's great to be mindful of your emotions and how it makes you feel. But I would also offer out that you can also be mindless.
Mm-hmm.
Take the time that you need to feel those emotions and do nothing else. And if your therapy of that is binge watching a show on Netflix, do it. No one else can judge you for that. Be mindless at times, because sometimes you got to give it a break.
And I want to touch on one thing that hit me really hard. You said at times before the gas station incident, you had a perspective that you were really hard on yourself, and you were kind of down on yourself and beating yourself up and so forth. And what I mean by that, what I see in that is, when that was your perspective, there was no way you could ever be in the purpose and passion that you're in now. Because
without a doubt, 100%.
You could not get there because you were beating yourself up all the time. Mm-hmm. And then you said something, I wrote it down, so I want people to remember this. It's okay to be not okay.
Yeah.
And I want you to tell people, Kyle, it's okay to go get help.
It is. And I will tell you right now, I would not be here today if I didn't get help. Without going into details, I would not be here on this earth if I didn't raise my hand and get help. And I will tell you that no one else was going to do it for me. I had to do it myself. And the first step of that is to acknowledge that you're not okay, and that's okay. Raise your hand afterwards and reach out, not to one person, because that person, like I had said, may not want to deal with it because they've got other stuff going on. But tell other people, reach out. I went through 3 therapists before I got to Dr. White, who specializes in this space. And I was my number one advocate for my own well-being. But you have to be able to say, I'm not okay, and I want to do something about it. And it starts with internal dialogue, but it expands rapidly with outward dialogue to people. Don't overuse it and make that your only level of conversation with people, but let them ask you if you're okay. And if they want to engage on a level of that, that's great, because you need as many people on your team as humanly possible. My team is accepting open applications as we speak, and it will never be closed. I'm going to be the biggest employer in this world for Team Kyle, more than Amazon. Sorry, Jeff Bezos, but there's going to be more people on Team Kyle than Jeff Bezos and Amazon, because I need that. That again fills my cup and keeps me going to be a better me, so that I can have a purpose, a passion, and give back.
There you go. I love it. And the other thing I think we can add to this, it's okay to be not okay, but when you're okay, it's good to help others get to be 100%. Okay as well. Yep. Right? I mean, that helps you continue to be okay when you can help and serve others and tell them your story and say, hey, this is me. I'm a human being. This is what happened to me. It can happen, to any of us. Go get help. You need help. If you need help, it's okay.
One of my favorite things that I take pride in as a professional was when I was in that CEO role, was to mentor and uplift employees to go on and be better things, whether it be
Right.
internally within your organization, or to use the analogy, pushing the baby bird out of the nest and letting them fly.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to fly off somewhere else and do great things. And I still connect with some of those people to this day where they call me and go, Kyle, I wish my boss was like you.
Yeah. Now
And
you're getting me really excited, because that's a whole nother show that we can get into, because I was waiting for that. I'll be honest with you. I was waiting for that this whole show, to you talk about when you're a CEO, because I always said this, when I ever was a coach, when I coached kids, when I coach people, it's about 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. It's about getting them to get to their abilities and beyond, and get that light bulb to turn on. And we could get into a whole nother show on that. We might have to do podcasts too here, because now you got me really fired up, because it's all about, again, Kyle, it's all about that servant part of you.
Yeah. And,
right?
and I will tease the second podcast. If you want me on back, I'll be more than happy to do so. Think about it this way. Feel free to take risks, whether it be personally or professionally, because those people that are watching you in that professional setting are going to watch you succeed, and they're also going to see you fail. And they may take that lesson from you failing and recovering and go, oh, I've reached this same crossroads of decision. I remember what happened to him. I'm going to do it the right way the next time. And so that's just paying it forward.
Yes. Oh my God, this is blowing up. Hey, I just got to say this, because we're running out of time. Tell people where they can get your book, how to get on your website, how to get you on Twitter, and I think you're on Instagram too.
Yep.
How they can get a part of you.
Yeah, so the book is currently being written, so it's not published yet. Hope to have it out, knock on wood, 2022. I spend a lot of time working on that in my downtime. But the best ways to get a hold of me, email is kyle@thiscontrarianlife.com. The website is www.thiscontrarianlife.com. On Instagram, it is this_contrarian_life. And on Twitter, it's Contrarian Kyle.
Get a hold of him. Get on his Twitter. I just followed him today on Instagram and Twitter. I'm all in. I'm all in with this, and we will be in touch. I want to thank you for coming on today. You helped people progress big time today. And that's what this is about. It's the People Progressing podcast. And that's what you did. You're an amazing man, and you're using your gifts to help others and to serve others, which is what we should all be doing, in my opinion, my humbled opinion. And I just appreciate you for doing what you're doing. You're making the world a better place. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the offer to be on the show. I will leave you with one last thought. If you feel like you're being weird, embrace it, because that's contrarian.
There you go. I love it. I love it. You just changed people's lives today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe.
Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye. I want to thank you for all coming on to the People Progressing podcast this week with Kyle. What a great show it was with Kyle Nelson today. And it's an amazing thing to listen to somebody who's gone through some of the things that Kyle's gone through, and is now helping others and helping other people progress. And so just really excited about it. You can get a hold of me through my website, coachjoewhiteconsulting.com. You can get my book. I also have new t-shirts and hats that say hashtag fear regret and hashtag win the process, and coffee tumblers and so forth and you can get those through my website. We're going to start a fear regret thing in our country here. We're going to do what we can so we don't have regrets in our life. So appreciate all your support. Download this podcast, subscribe to the podcast, give me any comments you need to. You also get a hold of me through my email at coachjoewhite97@gmail.com. Thank you. Keep progressing and have a great day. Thank you.